Thanks for letting me share with you this morning. As you probably already know, am Parker's dad. That's actually how I go on campus here. Everyone knows me as Parker's dad. Otherwise, I'm known as Matt Price. I teach here at MVNU, Mount Vernon Nazarene University. Before that, served as a missionary in West Africa. And before that, spent some time as a youth pastor and pastor in the Kansas City area. Well, since returning to MVNU, I've had an opportunity to teach several hundred students and have been able to share with them the story of our lives and our work in West Africa. And now I also have been able to share in about 250 different churches across the United States, as well as in Africa and Europe, about the work that God is doing in West Africa. And for us, it all started in January 12, 2003. We were on our way, running down the airport terminal, trying to catch our flight. It had taken us a few hours. In fact, we probably beat our luggage onto the plane. The reason was we were trying to get on a plane and we didn't have a visa. Now, at that time, travelers from the United States to the Ivory Coast, the Cote d'Ivoire, where we were going to be living for what we were hoping to be the next 30 years of our lives. Uh, Americans never needed a visa until this previous 3 months when we were trying to work out the situation there with our director and other missionaries that lived there. You see, the most stable democratic country in Africa, within about, I don't know, about 6 weeks' time, turned into one of the most destabilized countries and on the verge of civil war. Things had settled down a little bit. We were kind of concerned. We were in prayer. We were sharing with churches. They were praying also for us, for our colleagues, and for our African brothers and sisters living in the Cote d'Ivoire. And we were hoping that there wouldn't be an issue when we got to the airport. There was. So Fred, who was behind the desk, was tapping on his computer. He was saying that we could not get on. I was praying that we could get on. And we worked out some details. We're able to get our luggage through security. We literally ran down the tarmac, Parker and Peyton with their little Blues Clues backpacks on, and us with our little rolly cases. We're running down the terminal. Now, it just happened to be one of those little puddle jumper planes, a little plane to get from a short distance to another to get to the international airport so we could go on to Africa. And so we actually ran out onto the tarmac, down the stairs, across, up the stairs into the plane. It was spitting snow. It was several degrees below freezing, and we were dressed for Africa. I mean, we had shorts, t-shirts on, that kind of thing. Finally, get on the plane, get settled in, and I just remember leaning back, going, "Finally, we're on our way." See, by that time, it had taken at least 5 years of direct preparation with World Mission. Before, with around that 5 years, it had taken about 9 years of preparation of going to college, getting a degree, going to seminary, getting practical experience in local church ministry, uh, walking through all of the process from World Mission, even pursuing and earning a PhD and for the work that we were going to be doing in education in West Africa. And so we finally get on the plane. I sat down, leaned back, and was like, "Finally, so glad that's over." Little did I know it was just beginning. We arrived about a day later, and it was not spitting snow, and it was not below freezing. In fact, it was somewhere around 98 to 99 degrees Fahrenheit outside. It was about 60 to 70% humidity at 7 p.m. at night. And I just remember we got our luggage. We met one of our colleagues there at the airport. He walked us through security, got us out to the car, and we met some of our other missionary colleagues. And they were so excited to have us. We were so excited to be there. This new phase of our life was going to begin, and things were looking good. And so we made our way through the first week. We began unpacking. We began language studies. The boys were visiting their school that they were going to start going to, and things were going very well and even our first Sunday, we visited a church and worshipped with West Africans, and just to kind of being immersed in this French-speaking, very exotic culture, and started language study with our friend JJ, and things were going really well. Even went to an international service, and some of the missionaries who were there were like, "Oh man, if you guys are sending missionaries, things must be getting a lot better, and there must not be any problems anymore politically." And we were all smiles and just relishing in this new opportunity and this great environment that God had sent us, and all the things that might be in store for our family. The next week we got up for church, and we're getting ready, and we got a phone call from our colleague Mark, and he said, before you guys get ready for church, you just want to maybe pull back a little bit, and just, you're not going to be able to go outside. In fact, we encourage you not to go even outside the gate, the walled gate outside of your house. It just, things are kind of crazy right now. Things kind of went south overnight, and there are demonstrations all over the city against the president and these other things that were going on in the Ivory Coast at the time, because of this impending civil war, and all these groups were kind of going at each other. So he said, so he's just like, sit back, stay inside, don't go out. And so we just, Sonia, I remember, just looked at each other and we're like, okay. And we were kind of getting ready for this a little bit. Some of the other missionaries had told us that instead of snow days, and I'm not sure what the equivalent would be in Hawaii, but instead of snow days, we would have 2 days. And so this was, I guess, a Q day. So we just began unpacking, kind of spent the day inside. And the next day, and then the next day, and then the next day. And finally, Thursday, we met as a group. As a group, talked about some of the situation going on, and there was some special speech and all these things that would basically determine whether or not we could stay in the country or evacuate, which is a difficult decision for any group to make. And a lot of the local leaders were being consulted. They were very concerned, and they were actually anxious for maybe some of the foreign missionaries like us to maybe leave, because sometimes even being present would put local leaders in danger, especially if local leaders took it upon themselves to try to protect us, and things would get out of hand very quickly. Well, to make a very long story short, 3 weeks after we arrived, we actually flew back out of uh, Abidjan. We were in a single engine plane flown by our colleague, who at the time we had a Nazarene Mission Aviation plane in the Ivory Coast. And he flew us out, 6 people at a time. And over the next 3 or 4 days, flew out all of the missionaries and their families that were located in the Ivory Coast. We landed next door in a country of Ghana, and we were kind of there in limbo. There was a missionary there, plus other groups, because many missionaries and NGO workers and government workers were leaving the country. International business uh, uh, workers were all leaving the country, and most were going to Ghana, which was just next door. And they were trying to find places for us to stay. And I remember we bounced around to like 3 different guest houses, and things were pretty crazy. And while we were there, we were all finding out kind of what our next assignments would be. And one family went back to the U.S., a couple families went to Kenya, and one of the single missionaries, a couple of the single missionaries, and ourselves were sent to South Africa, at the very bottom tip of South Africa, to Johannesburg, to the regional office, and we were living there with around other missionaries that were located there. We spent about 6 months there. So in our first um, 6 months of missionary service, we lived in 3 different countries in Africa. While we were there, we were trying to get visas to go to France to study French. We intended to do that in West Africa. This didn't work out. We could not get a hold of the embassy in France. We couldn't get a hold of the consulate trying to work out visas to go. And so we decided the best course of action would be to return. And as we were leaving that day to go to the airport, there was also another man there who we'd kind of heard of. He was from Cape Verde, and he was a part of the work there. And then he was also part of the work in Central Africa. And little did we know at the time, as we gathered in a circle to pray, um, that Eugenio Duarte, who was there to actually accept the position of field director or field strategy coordinator for West Africa, um, was there to pray with us and pray over us. We went to the airport together, and he encouraged us along the way. And we went on to the U.S. Sonia and I left the boys with some family. We got in a borrowed minivan and drove from Ohio to Washington, D.C., about an 8-hour drive. We actually, no, the boys went with us. Never mind. The boys actually were with us. We drove down to Washington, D.C., about 8 hours away, went in person to the French consulate, walked in. Sonia's super organized. So we walk up to the desk finally. We're standing in line. We're up there, and the guy goes, "Okay, we need all these different things." He started listing off these things that only a French guy could think of. And he even had like the little mustache, and he was all prim and proper, and Sonia just kind of opened the notebook of all of her stuff and said, "Here's all of her information." And he was like, even he looked a little surprised that it was so organized. And so he took the materials. He goes, "Well, come back in about an hour." So we went out. We were in Germantown, and so we kind of walked over to the National Mall, went to the White House and Lincoln Memorial, and walked around a little bit. Hour or so later, we walked in, waited about 15 minutes, and he said, "Here are your visas to go to France." And so he handed all four passports out to us, and we were just amazed. So we got back in the car, praise the Lord, because it took about 80 minutes to what we found out from other missionaries who we were going to be studying language with in France. Some of them, it took months of this process to go through. So we arrived 4 weeks later. We arrived in the U.S. 4 weeks later. We arrived in France, and now we were ready to study. And I just remember being on the train, there in Lyon, on our way to Albertville, where we were going to be living and studying, and just thinking to myself, finally, finally, we've arrived. Little did I know that things were just beginning. And while we were there, we began studying French, signing in classes with other adults. Parker and Peyton and so many of the other kids went 2 blocks down to the public school and began learning French. They learned French simply by going to school with other French-speaking kids and French-speaking teachers. And these bouncy boys, 2 years old, 4 years old, but they would come home at the end of the day and they were just zonked. They were so tired. They would just be almost comatose, on the couch for about an hour. Then they would kind of come back to their senses and back to it. And every day they would go. And about 3 months later, they were actually fluent in French. And we spent a few more months there. While we were there, we were asked by our new field strategy coordinator, Eugenio Duarte, if we would consider maybe going to another country, because the Ivory Coast, it was still kind of rough there, and things really weren't settled down. And he said, maybe it'd be better if you consider going to Benin. And Sonny and I, we thought about it, we prayed about it, and we said, yeah, we do want to do this. And so we told my prayer partners, 2 Assemblies of God missionaries. And the one guy goes, I told him about, I've been asked to go to another country. And he goes, "Well, wherever you go, don't go to Benin." And my jaw just drops. I go, that is exactly where we're being asked to go. He goes, "Oh man, spiritual warfare is so difficult there. That's like the focal point of the practice of Voodoo. The capital of Voodoo is Ouida. The Ouija board is named after Ouida, and Ouida is right next to Cotonou. And that's the city that they were asking us to go to." He goes, yeah, don't go. And I was like, well, I guess you're really gonna have to pray for us then, because we already said yes. And so after 11 months in France, almost 12 months, Parker, Peyton, Sonia, and I got onto another airplane and made our way back to West Africa.